Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, April 14th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about Vice President Kamala Harris. Now, I know I haven't been making a lot of videos talking about what the former vice president might be doing in her future. We did a lot of that about 2 months ago when we discussed the possibility that she might run for governor or might run for president in 2028, and there's a lot of speculation really circulating around what her next steps are going to be in the immediate. In the past 2 days, we've seen a lot of news conversation around whether or not Kamala Harris, one, is writing a book, creating a policy think tank, running for governor, running for president, deciding to step back from politics, and there's a lot of conversation really that is driving her name back up in the mainstream media and amongst Democrats and Republicans nationwide and statewide in California. So I felt it would be fitting to create a video for the first time in quite some time to discuss what Kamala Harris might be doing, what updates we have on this end, taking a look at it and seeing what people are saying about the former vice president and her chances of becoming the next president or next governor of California. And since this channel primarily focuses on elections and on, strictly speaking, not strictly because we do talk about a lot of things, but primarily speaking ahead to 2026 and 2028, I think about this decision that Kamala Harris made way back when we talked about how she set her own deadline for her next move. Those close to the former vice president said that in an intimate dinner space, she had shared that she was going to give her decision by the end of the summer, make a decision if she was running for governor or running for president, and make that known to the nation sometime later down the line. And while I don't think we would see, should she run for president, an announcement in summer of 2025 saying I'm running for president, but rather that I'm not running for governor, I think that's what we'd likely see. But if she was running for governor, probably would start to see, some more conversations about that quite early on. Now, this new LA Times article, though, is really interesting to me because it is titled exactly as it said. Democrats running for California governor take digs at Kamala Harris's delayed decision on the race. And I think a lot of this comes from the fact that the 2026 California gubernatorial race for the largest state in the nation, nearly 1 in 8 Americans are from California, is pretty much on freeze right now because everybody, and I mean everybody, is pending their decision on what Kamala Harris is doing. For instance, some very big names. The current lieutenant governor of California has announced that they will withdraw from the race if Kamala Harris runs. Katie Porter, who was the runner-up in the California Senate race in the last cycle, also announced that if Kamala Harris runs, she will also withdraw. And of those who have already withdrawn or declined, you have big names, well-known names across the state, a lot of them in expectation that Kamala Harris might run. Now, a big name recently that I think really did sort of shake up the way we talk about these things is Xavier Becerra, who announced that he is running for governor of California. Now, someone who has been very close to the former vice president, had been serving in the administration, had been serving too as California Attorney General at the exact same time that Kamala Harris was the United States Senator from the state. They had been working alongside in the administration, and so his announcement was a subtle nod to some that Kamala Harris might not be running for California governor. But to others who know their relationship a little bit more intimately have also expressed that this should not withdraw the California gubernatorial race from Kamala Harris's radar just because he is deciding to run. And so it's a lot of conflicting information here, but it brought it back up into the spotlight, thus all the conversation that has continued to talk about whether or not her pathway forward is in California or on the national stage. Now, the California governor's race is something, again, we've already talked about pretty much at length. I do think that largely speaking, if Kamala Harris wants to run for governor, she will likely get a lot of support in terms of endorsements and likely do well in terms of polling. Based on what we've seen thus far in recent numbers, Emerson College being the most recent one, is that when Kamala Harris is on the ballot for the Democratic primary, or really because California doesn't have Democratic primaries, but across the state, she is practically dominating across this field, which would be an indicator that she would likely easily win the gubernatorial race should she win it. And so that really is the question. The governor's race seems to be pretty easy, but the national stage, far more ambitious and obviously a much higher office, but also something too that isn't as set in stone as the governor's race. And I think that's a lot of what people are thinking about, especially her closest advisors. When you think about the 2028 presidential election and you think about what might happen on the national stage, we think about it from a few perspectives. One, who wins this election, very obviously, but two, the legacy that it sets for the winning and losing parties. right? When Biden dropped out of the race and Kamala Harris eventually lost the election, it largely was a stain on the Democratic Party's legacy and Joe Biden himself, given that he has been serving for the past 4 years. And I think looking at it from the perspective, had Kamala Harris won the election, I'm sure Joe Biden's legacy would have been seen as largely savioristic, right? He dropped out of the race, provided a pathway forward for Kamala Harris, elevated her to be vice president, and then eventually was the reason she became president. Those are the things that I think would have been written to the history books had Kamala Harris won the election, but she didn't, right? And so we have to understand, too, that for Kamala Harris, it isn't just a simple question of, do I run for president of the United States? It's a question of if she wants to put herself out there a second time with a very large possibility that if it is a competitive race, you're at a 50-50 odds at best in most presidential elections of winning a race. And that is going to be the consideration. Because Kamala Harris right now is very much held in high regard amongst the Democratic Party, and if she ran for governor, would continue to hold that high regard amongst the Democratic Party. But should she lose the 2028 election, and again, I know, right, it is a huge hypothetical, but should she lose the 2028 election, a lot of Democrats are going to turn on her just as they did Biden in 2024. Largely, you see that in opinion polling, a huge chunk of the Democratic Party base says that Joe Biden should not have been running in the first place and that they contribute, at least in part, him to the eventual loss in 2024. So it's a very complicated decision for Kamala Harris that is a lot more complex than just deciding, do I run for governor or do I run for president? At face value, it seems to be very, one way or the other, and that you should just go hone in on one, but I can understand why it's taking so long. But I think a lot of Democrats are largely upset that it is taking so long. Because for many of these Democrats running for California governor, that is the highest office they could even fathom in many cases, largely because it is the biggest state in the union. 1 in 8 Americans, again, live in California. 1 in 8 Americans live in California. So you have to understand from that perspective that many of the voters in California, many of the Democrats too, especially those who are running, very much feel like this should be the priority should she win it. But my genuine take here is that I don't see her leaning in either direction. But I do think we need to start expecting a story earlier than what we might say. She said end of summer. We'll probably hear something in June or July. Because as more agitation starts and brews on the Democratic side, the more that she's sort of put in this oppositional lens, I'm reminded, and again, I don't think this is an exact circumstance, but I want to orient us back to 2023 when Ron DeSantis floated with the idea that he might run for president. Now, if you remember anything about the 2022 midterm elections, it's that while Democrats might have done well on the governor's races nationwide, holding on to Kansas, flipping Arizona, holding on to a number of states, Florida was a shining star for the GOP. Ron DeSantis won his governor's race by 19.4% against the former Republican governor who had been elected twice in the state of Florida, might I add. Charlie Crist, who went from Republican to independent to Democrat now, who lost by 19 points against Ron DeSantis, someone who had already previously held the governor's mansion, might I add. And so DeSantis winning by 19.4% really hyped him up. But he didn't announce a presidential bid shortly after. He waited. He waited quite a bit, actually, to announce that he was running for president of the United States. But because he couldn't engage meaningfully with the opposing attacks from Donald Trump and other Republicans, his approvals went down. His popular support nationwide went down. His own approval in his own home state went down. And that is the risk that we would start to see. Now, I don't think many Democrats would be guns blazing attacking Kamala Harris. But what I do think is that we're starting to see some of these, more tight-lipped Democrats who might have held out before, giving her a month or two, are now upset that they're giving her 4 months or 5 months. And I think that's really where the crux of the problem comes in for many of these Democrats, which is that they are set on running. And the longer that she takes it, the longer she draws it out, for them, they see it as an electoral liability. But Kamala Harris can't respond to attacks like these. Now, I don't think it's going to get as messy as the 2024 Republican primary. That was a much bigger race and obviously arguably, a lot higher stakes for someone like DeSantis who, was meeting the moment. Kamala Harris will hold that level of popularity regardless of what she decides to do until the 2028 election, right? So that needs to be understood. But I do think there is this threat here that Democrats feel as candidates in California from Kamala Harris should she decide to run for the race, which is why they are itching for a decision now. So we'll see. I think it's been very interesting to see how Harris and her closest allies have really maneuvered this news space, right? When Hillary Clinton lost the election, it was, pretty much I'm done with politics. And that was very clear. It is very rare for anyone who has lost a presidential election to, then turn around and say, I want to be governor or I want to be president again. But under the extenuating circumstances of Kamala Harris, it's clear that a lot of voters arguably see an argument for her to run again. Now, whether or not you think, from a personal standpoint, as someone watching this video, if she should run or not, put that aside, a decision will be made, and it looks like the likeliest outcome is not a policy think tank, that she will be writing a book, but it will be, does she run for president or does she run for governor? And the time and the clock is ticking. Democrats are eagerly anticipating, those in support and those in opposition are eagerly anticipating to hear what she wants to do next. And so it'll be very fascinating to watch really all of this unravel and unfold potentially over the next year if she runs for governor, over the next 3 years if she runs for president, because she's still a very major political actor in the Democratic Party. A lot of Democrats in recent polls have cited her as their leader of the Democratic Party right now. And in the absence of a presidential figure, that's where Kamala Harris comes in right now, because she was the most recently recognizable presidential figure, being she was the Democratic nominee for president. The question is now, how does she use that? What does she build off of it? Where does she run? How does she run? And what does that mean for the future of American politics? So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, this video you can watch, then a playlist for my 2026 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.